The file on Elias Vance, architect of renown and recent ghost, was thin and stained with lukewarm coffee, a testament to how quickly the police had outsourced the problem to the unsolvable pile. Vance hadn't just vanished. He had vanished from a place that shouldn't structurally exist. The building, known locally and dismissively as the Torsion, stood on a forgotten plot in rural New Hampshire, a beacon of geometric defiance. April Woods, leaning back in her rented sedan, reviewed the initial police report. Vance had been working on a final, hyper-secret design, a project he described only as a necessary inversion of Euclidean expectation. The report noted a massive expenditure on specialized sound-dampening concrete and several tons of lead sheeting, materials disproportionate to the small, elegant two-story structure visible above ground. The core mystery wasn't the disappearance, but the discrepancy. The property records indicated a total floor area of 3,500 square feet, yet Vance's construction permits detailed a requirement for materials capable of supporting a structure 3 times that size. Detective Hayes, the lead investigator who had long since moved on to mundane burglaries, had summed it up in his final, dismissive note: structural impossibility. No sign of foul play or exit. Closed pending new evidence. This was precisely the kind of geometric knot that snagged April's investigative impulse. She had spent the last week studying Vance's earlier, highly theoretical papers on dimensional folding, the concept that, with precise engineering and pressure points, space could be slightly compressed or stretched, allowing a larger internal volume than the external envelope suggested. It was pseudoscience until Vance built the torsion. April pulled up satellite imagery, overlaying the building blueprints with topographical surveys. The results were chillingly consistent. The structure's foundation footprint was exactly 50 by 35 feet. But the detailed elevation plans for the subterranean level, the impossible basement Vance insisted upon, were missing entirely. She had secured access using an obscure zoning loophole. The house, despite its apparent normalcy, was classified as a temporary architectural anomaly due to its incomplete final inspection. April gripped the steering wheel, looking at the ordinary gate ahead. She knew the danger wasn't from a typical criminal. The danger was from the space itself, the possibility that Vance had actually succeeded in building something that defied the fundamental physics of his own reality. April passed the rusted wrought iron gate, the tires crunching gravel that had clearly not been driven upon in months. The torsion stood stark against the late autumn sky, a perfect, symmetrical cube of poured concrete and dark, heavily tinted glass. It looked expensive, minimalist, and profoundly boring. The normalcy was the most unnerving element. There were no strange angles, no visible deformities. It appeared to be a flawless piece of modern residential architecture. She met Detective Hayes by the front door. Hayes was weary, middle-aged, and clearly irritated to be dragged back to his dead-end case. "Look, Woods, I don't know what you expect to find," Hayes grumbled, handing her a heavy brass key. "We searched it 6 times. We ran ground-penetrating radar. The basement, if you want to call it that, is just a concrete box. Nothing moves, nothing breathes, and nothing indicates Vance is still here. We assumed he cracked, walked away, and started a new life in Costa Rica." April ignored the sarcasm, focusing instead on the heavy metal seal around the front door frame. "Why the industrial sealant, Detective? This isn't a vault." Hayes shrugged. "Vance installed it. Said it was for atmospheric stability. Look, the entire house is a museum of over-engineering." April's journalistic instinct flared. She took the key, the brass surprisingly cold. As she turned it in the lock, she noticed something the police reports hadn't emphasized: the shadows. Even in the muted afternoon light, the shadows cast by the corners of the house seemed unnaturally crisp and slightly askew, falling where they shouldn't geometrically land. Inside, the air was stale, cold, and utterly silent. The ground floor was a sparse, open-plan living area. Everything was exactly in place, meticulous, almost sterile. April pulled out her laser measuring tool and aimed it across the main living space. The reading was 48 feet. She stepped outside and measured the corresponding exterior wall: 50 feet. A 2-foot difference, negligible in standard construction, but mathematically impossible in a perfectly rectilinear cube of this complexity. Did your team notice the measurement discrepancy? April asked, lowering the laser. Hayes scoffed. Drywall thickness, insulation, standard error. What matters is the basement, woods. That's where he supposedly was. April nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the central feature of the room, a polished black metal staircase descending to the lower level. The staircase felt wrong, too solid, too black, absorbing the light around it, like a gravitational sinkhole carved into the floor. The staircase to the lower level was the only way down. Vance had installed no elevator, no windows, only this single, unyielding metal path. April hesitated at the top step, feeling a strange pressure in her ears, like descending rapidly in an airplane. Hayes, standing nervously near the front door, watched her. Don't linger, Woods. The air quality down there is fine, but it's claustrophobic. Just concrete and pipes. April began her descent, placing each step carefully. As she reached the third step, the light seemed to warp. The low-frequency hum that had been almost subliminal upstairs intensified, resonating in her chest. She continued down what felt like maybe 10 steps, yet the ceiling above her, the floor she had just left, seemed to recede far faster than 10 steps should allow. When she finally reached the bottom, she turned back to look up. Hayes was a tiny, indistinct figure in the distance, peering over a well that seemed impossibly deep. The descent had felt like 15 feet, standard for a basement, but the vertical distance now appeared to be 40 or 50 feet. She was standing in a small landing area, faced with a heavy, sealed door bearing a complex, machined locking mechanism. April activated her digital spirit level. The floor was perfectly level. The walls were perfectly vertical. Yet, her inner gyroscope screamed violation. She contacted Dr. Lena Petrova, a structural physicist she had hired remotely to review the torsion's limited public records. Petrova specialized in materials science and non-traditional load bearing. Dr. Petrova, I'm at the bottom of the basement stairs. The descent was roughly 15 feet, but the perceived height back up to the first floor is dramatically increased. I estimate 40 feet or more. Petrova's voice, filtered through static, was strained. April, I just reviewed Vance's published doctoral thesis from 2 decades ago, the one everyone called conceptual garbage. It discusses using ultradense structural concrete and layered lead insulation not for shielding, but for mass distribution dash. He theorized that by concentrating mass in a structurally small area, he could locally bend space-time, creating a micro-wormhole or, as he termed it, the fold. He wasn't building a basement beneath the house. He was building a vast space that occupied the house's footprint, but was mathematically inverted. The entry point, the staircase, is the neck of the bottle. April stared at the immense, sealed door before her, now understanding the chilling implications. She wasn't standing under the torsion. She was potentially standing inside its mathematical inversion, a space compressed and contained by the physics of the upper floor. Dr. Petrova's analysis confirmed April's growing dread. Elias Vance had designed a spatial anomaly disguised as a modern home. The upper floors acted as a colossal compression field, forcing the subterranean space into an area that was geometrically unsound. April sent Petrova detailed measurements of the landing area, comparing the width of the heavy door to the exterior dimensions of the house foundation. April, the door with you measured is 12 feet. The internal measurement of the entire house, foundation edge to edge, is 50 feet. If the landing area connects directly to a subterranean structure, that structure must be contained within that 50-foot boundary. Yet, Vance utilized 12-foot supports and beams, suggesting a structure that must span at least 100 feet. Petrova's voice crackled with professional disbelief, mingled with horror. The dimensions simply do not close, April. The blueprints that Hayes gave you, the simplified ones, are a diversion. The actual building must use non-Euclidean angles internally. You are standing inside a structure where the sum of the internal angles is not 180 degrees. Be extremely careful. Spatial distortion can mess with more than just light. It can affect the flow of air and, potentially, gravity. April pulled a high-powered thermal scanner from her pack, aiming it at the colossal, sealed door. It showed a massive drop in temperature on the other side, inconsistent with a standard, climate-controlled basement. She located the complex locking mechanism, a rotating array of heavy, sequential tumblers. Vance, the architect, had intended this space to be impregnable. Using the schematics April had sourced from an old materials supplier, she began the painstaking process of bypassing the lock, a combination of digital decryption and physical manipulation. The air in the landing felt thick, oily, and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. She realized the sound-dampening concrete wasn't meant to keep noise in. It was meant to insulate the outside world from the bizarre, structural silence of the fold. As the final tumbler clicked, a rush of cold, dry air blasted past her. The heavy door groaned open on impossibly large, hydraulic hinges, revealing the impossible basement, a space that immediately made the exterior world irrelevant. The space beyond the door was not a basement. It was a cathedral of concrete and steel, vast and unsettlingly high. April stood on the threshold, her headlamp beam swallowed almost immediately by the immense distance. The scale of the structure was staggering. It easily spanned hundreds of feet in every direction, a subterranean factory floor that could not, logically, fit beneath the small, two-story house 50 feet above her head. The architectural conceit was brutalist and terrifying. Massive, pre-stressed concrete columns rose from the floor and vanished into a high ceiling that was crisscrossed with thousands of exposed, heavy-gauge wires and ventilation ducts. The air here was drier, colder, and held a metallic tang. It felt like standing inside a pressurized container. April started mapping the space, using a specialized, long-range scanner. The scanner confirmed the impossible. The structure was significantly larger than the physical footprint of the house above it. It seemed to expand laterally into the bedrock, defying the boundaries of the property line. Petrova, I'm inside. The basement is enormous. I estimate it's at least 4 times the size of the house above ground. It's built like an underground bunker, but the sheer volume is mathematically impossible given the external shell. Petrova's voice was high-pitched with awe and fear. April, that means Vance succeeded. He manipulated the spatial relationship. He didn't build into the ground. He built a pocket dimension that uses the upper structure as its anchor. You are in a contained spatial anomaly. Look for the structural core, the point of highest mass concentration. That's where he would be. April moved cautiously past immense, silenced HVAC units. There were signs of recent, furious work. Welding tools left mid-task, empty coffee cups, and stacks of esoteric structural engineering books, pages dog-eared and marked with frantic notations. One thing was conspicuously absent: dust. The entire massive structure looked like it had been cleaned rigorously, perhaps only hours before April's arrival. As she moved deeper, the geometry began to play tricks on her vision. Parallel lines seemed to converge slightly, and the height of the ceiling appeared to fluctuate depending on where she stood, creating optical vertigo. Vance had built a structure that actively attempted to confuse human perception, turning spatial reality into psychological warfare. She knew that somewhere in this impossible vastness, the man who designed it had left his final, fatal testament. Deeper into the impossible basement, April found a temporary workspace, a makeshift drafting table constructed from scaffolding and plywood. Scattered across the table were dozens of pages of Vance's final, hurried journal entries. They weren't focused on structural load or material stress. They were philosophical screeds rapidly descending into madness. She began documenting the findings, recognizing the journalistic gold hidden in the architect's final thoughts. One entry, dated 3 days before his disappearance, was particularly chilling. The earth resists. It hates the imposition of nonconformity, but the fold is established. The geometry holds. Now, the final test, the mirror effect. If I invert the structural weight on the central anchor, the perceived gravity within the fold should also invert. Not gravity itself, but the relationship of matter to the structure. The basement must become the ceiling, and the earth the sky. Only then will the paradox be complete. April looked up at the vast, distant ceiling of the subterranean space, crisscrossed with utility pipes and conduits. If Vance had succeeded, this ceiling was, functionally, the true ground floor of the house. The house above, which she had entered normally, was now the ceiling, and the earth below her feet was the true, vast, inverted roof. This explained the immense size. The basement was not constrained by the foundation, but by the properties of the distorted space itself. She noted repeated references to the anchor, a centralized, lead-lined containment unit Vance had begun constructing. It was meant to hold the concentrated mass required to maintain the fold. April realized that the key to finding Vance was finding the heart of his architectural experiment. As she processed the journals, she noticed a peculiar phenomenon on the polished concrete floor near the table. A thin sheen of water, perfectly still, seemed to wick away from the center of the room toward the walls, defying the slight, natural curvature of the floor. It was a subtle, physical manifestation of Vance's successful inversion. The gravity wasn't altered, but the structure's relationship to mass was. The floor she was walking on was behaving like a wall, or perhaps a colossal, convex ceiling. April utilized a high-frequency sound sensor designed to detect structural anomalies. The impossible basement was filled with a deep, pervasive silence, but the sensor picked up a faint, rhythmic sound originating from the apparent geographical center of the massive space. It wasn't human, it was a low-frequency, almost mechanical pulse, like a massive heart beating in slow motion. As she moved toward the sound, the visual distortion intensified. The colossal columns supporting the structure seemed to stretch and compress dynamically, and the cold air began to carry a strange, mineral odor. April's investigation had shifted from a missing person case to an exercise in locating the eye of a geometric storm. She navigated a maze of abandoned scaffolding and construction debris, documenting the bizarre construction methods Vance had employed. The joints between the colossal concrete slabs were seamless, locked with a proprietary epoxy that Vance had patented, capable of resisting enormous internal pressures. She was tracking the sound to a structure that seemed incongruous with the rest of the industrial space, a perfectly smooth, cylindrical tower roughly 30 feet in diameter and extending from floor to ceiling. This was the anchor. It was encased entirely in heavy, matte lead plating, absorbing all ambient light and sound, except for the insistent, low pulse that seemed to emanate from its core. April approached the anchor, running her hand along the cold, inert metal. It felt unnervingly solid, vibrating almost imperceptibly with a slow rhythm. She found a small access panel, reinforced with half-inch steel. Unlike the main entry, this was not meant to be opened easily or perhaps ever again. Vance had intended this lead cylinder to be the permanent, compressed heart of the torsion. Hayes had told her the ground-penetrating radar had shown a dense, centralized mass that the police couldn't explain. Now she knew that mass was housed here. She tried the magnetic locks on the access panel, finding them unresponsive to her electronic tools. This required brute force and a specialized tool set she didn't possess. A sudden, sharp noise echoed from the distant entrance, the sound of the heavy metal door, the neck of the fold, shutting with a definitive, chilling clang. April froze, her breath catching in the icy air. Hayes had been waiting outside. Had he locked her in? Or had the house's dynamic, unstable physics asserted itself, sealing the only exit to the outside world? The metallic clang of the exterior door sealing itself galvanized April. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford in a space designed to defy logic. She had to locate Vance's body, not just for the story, but now for survival. The architect must have left an emergency exit plan, however insane. The low, rhythmic pulsing from the lead anchor intensified slightly, a subtle shift that indicated a change in the internal pressure of the fold. April abandoned the access panel and searched the perimeter of the anchor. She found what looked like a maintenance hatch, not a door, but a panel secured by 6 massive hex bolts. She pulled out a specialized ratcheting wrench and began the arduous, nerve-shredding task of loosening them. The effort was immense, the lead plating thick. As she worked, she reviewed the last journal entries she'd photographed. The integration is complete. The inversion is stable. I must occupy the true center of the structure to witness the final transition. It is the only way to prove the architecture. To exist within the 0 point of the fold is to achieve structural truth. I am ready for the ultimate foundation. April realized the horrible truth. Vance hadn't just used the anchor to stabilize the structure. He had intended to entomb himself within it, believing that inhabiting the impossible core was the final proof of his theoretical physics. The third bolt shrieked as it finally gave way. Behind the lead panel, she could detect a different, organic scent, not metallic cold, but decay and preservation, a chilling combination. The final bolt turned, and April gripped the wrench, pulling the heavy lead plate outward. It swung open on hidden, pressurized hinges, revealing a small, dark interior compartment lined with foam and wiring. The compartment was just large enough for a person to stand upright, but the space was designed to be pressurized and sealed from the rest of the world. Inside the anchor, illuminated by April's harsh headlamp, was the architect, Elias Vance. He was standing perfectly upright, or rather, hanging, meticulously strapped into a custom harness attached to the ceiling of the tiny, lead-lined compartment. His head was pointed downward, feet facing the compartment's floor, perfectly inverted relative to April's own orientation. Vance had achieved his final paradox. The compartment, being the core of the inverted space, was maintaining a localized, artificial inversion of the perceived gravity within the larger fold. Vance's body was remarkably well preserved due to the sealed, inert atmosphere and the incredibly low, stable temperature of the lead container. He was dressed in clean architectural fatigues, his hands resting naturally at his sides. The cause of death was instantly apparent. A thick, intravenous line trailed from a small, pressurized container mounted on the ceiling, Vance's true floor, and terminated in his left arm. The container was labeled nitrogen/anesthetic compound. He hadn't died violently. He had died willingly, self-entombed at the 0 point of his impossible creation. Clutched tightly in his right hand was a small, titanium key and a thick, vellum-bound architectural drawing. April carefully accessed the compartment, adjusting her stance to accommodate the disorienting sight of the inverted body. She gently retrieved the key and the drawing. The drawing was an elaborate, detailed cross-section of the torsion. It didn't just show the basement. It showed a hidden sublevel beneath the anchor itself, labeled maintenance/egress. The titanium key was for the emergency exit. She quickly photographed Vance's body and the surroundings, documenting his final, fatal position. He was not merely dead. He was the structural proof of his own impossible architecture, the permanent, inverted foundation of the torsion. As April secured the photos, a faint, muffled thud resonated from somewhere above, near the location of the sealed external door. Someone was trying to get in, or perhaps something was trying to get out. April grabbed her pack, knowing she had mere minutes to use Vance's escape route before the structural instability, the inherent violence of the fold, consumed the entire edifice. April followed the schematic on Vance's final drawing. The egress point was a small, pressurized door disguised as part of the anchor's floor panel, leading to a shallow utility tunnel far beneath the spatial anomaly. The titanium key clicked easily into the hidden lock, and the panel hissed open, releasing a draft of humid, earthy air, the smell of the actual, outside world. Before descending, she took one final look at Elias Vance, hanging peacefully in his inverted tomb, a martyr to impossible physics. The low, structural pulse of the torsion seemed to slow, almost stopping entirely, followed by a profound, shuddering groan that reverberated through the colossal concrete pillars. The fold was failing, perhaps destabilized by the access to the anchor. April dropped into the narrow tunnel just as the lights in the main basement began to flicker violently, accompanied by the sound of immense concrete plates grinding against each other. She crawled frantically through the claustrophobic space, the smell of damp soil and ancient bedrock overpowering the sterile air of the fold. The tunnel was short, leading directly away from the structural boundaries of the house. After what felt like an eternity, She found a final, heavy manhole cover, rusted shut. Using the heavy wrench retrieved from the anchor, April managed to pry the cover loose, shoving it aside just as the sound of tearing metal and collapsing structure erupted behind her. She scrambled out, emerging into a dense thicket of pines 50 yards from the house. She spun around just in time to see the impossible reality of the torsion implode. The house didn't collapse inward. It seemed to shrink, the external walls appearing to instantly compress into the ground, the windows shattering simultaneously as the dimensional pressure vanished. The effect was immediate and terrifyingly silent after the initial rupture. When the dust settled, only a shallow, smoking crater remained where the two-story house and its colossal, inverted basement had stood. April called Detective Hayes immediately, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Detective, I found Vance. He confirmed the structural inversion. The torsion is gone. I need immediate extraction, and you need to prepare for the biggest story of the decade." The impossible basement was real, and the architect died proving it. April stood amid the pines, the titanium key heavy in her hand, the detailed photos of the inverted body saved securely on her encrypted device. She had witnessed the failure of physics, the final, fatal proof of a man who managed to build a house upside down and found his final resting place within its impossible heart.